You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. The live stream. Detroit is different in Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit. All right, welcome back. Welcome back to Public Comment, and this is a special episode as we're in 2025. But before we step into 2025, we got to review everything that happened in year 2024. I'm Kari Frazier of Detroit is Different, and you're welcome to Public Comment, where we talk about a lot of municipal politics of the city of Detroit. So it's like the updates of what happened throughout the city of Detroit, really from one thing. It is the co-host of Public Comment, and every week, if you have the pleasure, you can get the pleasure of finding out beat to beat of some of the stories of what's happening in Detroit City Council's formal session. And this is from a notebook part of Bridge Detroit. Bridge Detroit is definitely where you can get some news stories about Detroit from the community lens, culture, and so much more. And the person I'm talking about with all of that introduction and sauce is Malachi Barrett. Malachi, how are you doing today?
Good morning. We were talking about doing some window wraps. It's cold out there, so I'm looking into that. If anybody's got some good recommendations on some cheap energy efficiency upgrades, let me know. Some weatherization.
Yes, it's as the song go, it's so cold in the D.
So cold in the D. I know that.
Yes, exactly. You know what I'm saying? And it gets real, even though I think that was like metaphorical and actual. But right now, actually, it's very cold in Detroit, but we love it because there's no snow on the ground as we're recording this. If you didn't know, we usually record these public comments a day before, early in the morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about a lot of the beats of what happened throughout 2024. 2024 was a year that, like a lot of years when it comes to Detroit City Council, a lot was passing through. A lot of money, a lot of ideas, a lot of ordinances, task force work. And we're going to just go through kind of a review of this, and we're going to preview some of what's moving forward in 2025 when we think about how we're moving forward. So with all of that, welcome to Public Comment as we keep everything going. It's a lot of stuff, as you guys can kind of see, the tax incentives, what's happening with solar infrastructure, a lot of city politics, repair services, reparations task force. It is a lot to discuss when we think of 2024 in the books from the city council lens. And let's open it up, right? Let's open it up. So I open up with the concept of fast track affordable housing ordinance. And this ordinance was something that moved forward as a way to help developers that are looking to provide affordable housing for Detroiters. And affordable housing is one of those issues that not just Detroiters are interested in, but Americans in general. And City Council really was excited about this fast track incentive so that developers could move past a lot of the red tape that it usually takes to get active on a lot of these projects. So you can have more affordable housing throughout the city of Detroit. The goal is to bring more transparency and oversight to what's happening, and also something about these tax incentives that will be broken down. So as they're fast tracked, it'll just be like, hey, this group kind of got this, that group got that. So as much as I'm giving like an overview, Malachi, can you give a little bit just of the tone as this was going through, as this is one of those initiatives that really received across the board support of City Council?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a need the city council has identified, obviously, to build more affordable housing in the city. The debate always comes down to how affordable is it? How low can that discount be where it actually, matches the incomes that residents in the city have? So, the discussion at the time was that this would kind of fill a middle gap in the market. It would make it easier for smaller developers to get approvals to build projects that serve that market. But I still think that there's more conversation we'll see this year about, people who are at the low income scale. I think a lot of this is aimed at targeting What's the low end of this? It's like 60% AMI.
Man, let's definitely
'Cause I
get
know you
into
like,
that. I love breaking down the whole concept of AMI because AMI is really the determinant factor as defined through really HUD like years ago. A lot of these ideas of affordable housing are concepts that begin as so much more attention is shifted towards suburbs throughout America. So in that, a lot of people were holding these properties and thinking to themselves, like, how do we make these determinations? I'm fresh off of something that I closed out the year with, where I had the pleasure of meeting an economist, Derek Hamilton, that's working with the AFL-CIO right now in a financial capacity. And he opened up like my scope of looking at a lot of different things. But one of the things about affordable housing is the AMI. So that is average median income. So that average median income, as you can kind of look at what that is, and we kind of have some breakdowns here in this chart that I'm going to show you guys. Median, mean, and mode, as I love always breaking this down, right? So median, mean, and mode are those concepts from algebra 2, trigonometry, back to high school. So we can look at mode as like in any number set, the number that comes up most often. So like if we have that number set, you know what that mode is because you see it most. And then you have the mean, which is the average, which I think would be a better determinant factor of defining affordable housing. Median is the middle number of the highest number and the lowest number. The tough thing about median, I believe, is that first off, the footprint to decide the median, and the example I always say is like if billionaire moves into your neighborhood, then immediately the median number is going to move obviously way further up. It would kind of be, if you remember college scores, like grading on the bell curve, you know what I'm saying? And you try to conspire with everybody else, like, look, if everybody get a C, then a C becomes an A. Nah, that's not necessarily how it works in college, and it definitely doesn't work like this for average median income. So when we look at these figures for like the city of Detroit, and it was approved massively for these tax incentives to be approved, but we look at the numbers that they have, and these numbers, based on a lot of what's happening throughout the city of Detroit, I just don't think align. So first off, we're looking at units for that AMI really that will receive a lot of these tax incentives are looking at being about $1,440 a month for a 1-bedroom and $1,728 a month for a 2-bedroom. So the concept is like, hey, if you're making $53,000 a year as a single person, or about $70,000 a year as a family of 3, then that would be cool. We also have to remember that a lot of these families of 3 are, I don't like the term, but I'm going to just speak to this, but single mothers with children. So technically a family of 3 with one person earning income still is by default a single person in that same scope. So when we look at like the determinant factors of this for like $1,700 a month, when we look at how much money the average Detroiter makes from a lot of the census data that's fresh in my mind from State of Black Detroit, the average Detroiter is making about $35,000 a year. And this becomes a very high mark to make when it comes for rent. And a good way to think about rent, just back to like these economic models, is rent should be about 30% of whatever your income is. So if you're making, $2,000 a month, you should be paying possibly at most $600 a month for rent. Now, with that $600, that obviously would include utilities inside of that too. So now you have about $1,400 for things like groceries, for expendable income and experiences, for investment as well. That is like a standard of looking at what we should be spending on rent. And that's just not the reality of even what's affordable, not just in Detroit, but most places. People are really striving to look at how they can find affordable housing as you look at these rates. Now, the fast track tax incentive, I look at as this is a gateway of what can happen to be empowered for people to have a program that really can be something that eventually meets a lot of the traders where they're at, because they're really looking at the extremely low, quote unquote, impoverished person. But what's looked at as low impoverished is the average Detroiter, and that's the average Detroit earning. So this is a gateway, I believe, to move towards something like that. And it needs to be an understanding of how that looks, as a lot of the people I know in development right now are partitioning off homes, almost in a boarding style house, where they're taking like 4 family units and providing shared bathrooms and spaces and rooms, and that rent is closer to like $500 a month, maybe $400 a month, $700 a month, and you're getting like a room, a shared kitchen, and a shared bathroom. And people are looking at this as an option for survival, because these are the options that people have based on the income opportunities that exist within the city of Detroit for the average Detroiter. So just being mindful that a lot of the tax incentives will still leave many Detroiters not in these new places, but possibly welcome new people to the city of Detroit for that, because Detroiters aren't earning at that capacity and clip. So,
Yeah,
Malachi, I don't know what you.
this is why the
Oh,
definitions are important. I mean, like you're saying, the ordinance defines persons of low income as those who earn 80% or less of the area median income, which is like $54,000 for a single person.
mhm.
Um, the council says that they need more housing for people who are in that 30%. So not
Yeah.
80%, 30%. Um, and that's somebody who's making like $20,000. So that's below, 35,000 is like the median of what people in the city make. The low income definition of this is a lot higher. The need council sees, the gap where people really aren't being served is even, below that median income for the city. So yeah, I think there's a lot more work to be done. This definitely is going to help folks who are there, in that these income brackets. The developers get bigger discounts. They get bigger tax breaks, basically, for offering larger reductions in rent, up to 60% AMI. Doesn't quite get to that 30 though that people are looking for. And then another thing that is a piece of this that will be interesting to watch. The fast track aspect of this ordinance, it basically speeds up approvals that city council previously needed to give. It makes some of those approval automatic. And there were some community folks who were concerned about that eliminating, important oversight and public input on projects that come before council and have to have kind of usually a more robust discussion, um, and have the public, an opportunity to speak before those are granted. Now, a lot of those breaks are just going to be granted automatically if they qualify under this ordinance. So, you know, uh, potential, red flag, something to watch. But the idea is to cut down on unnecessary regulation that was making it harder for smaller developers in particular to, clear those bars and get the funding that they need to build housing that people need.
Yeah, man. And the other point that we want to bring up is water infrastructure and affordability. It was not a lot into affordability, I think, from the council seat, but definitely from where people come from, as we the people are running a water for everybody campaign currently. But definitely, a lot of people near the end of the year got a letter about lead being in their pipes and coming to them. I believe
Including
that it
me.
was mass, me included, my dad.
Yeah.
Most Detroiters received one of these letters about some changes in the pipes that will happen over a timeline. And
By
this,
2040, the federal government has required all cities, including us, to remove all of their lead service lines. So we're in the process of doing that. We've really relied on state and federal money to do that. It's extremely expensive. I mean, I think one line is like $10,000 to replace, if you were to do it, privately. So this adds up, and there's hundreds of thousands of lines that need to come out. So yeah, that letter everybody got at the end of the year freaked me out. It freaked a lot of people out, probably.
mhm.
Basically, it was a required disclosure by the federal government about what your pipes are made out of, but they don't really know in a lot of cases. And I think this created some confusion because some of the letters said we don't know what's in your pipes, and some of them said that you have, a likely. It said you have lead. I mean, it probably should have said like you have a high likelihood based on how old your house is and things like that, because they got mine wrong. They sent me a letter saying that there was a lead, my house was connected to by a lead service line, which was news to me because when I moved in there, our inspector said that we had copper and, should be good to go. So
Mm.
thankfully, the city has been, like I said, they've been doing this. They've been replacing lead service lines, and they've been coordinating it with water and gas projects. So DTE came through my neighborhood to do something I can't remember. And the city coordinated lead replacements alongside that. So everybody on my street, if you signed up for it, could get one. I called the city, said, "Hey, you guys sent me this letter saying I got lead. Can you come fix me up?" And they showed up and they dug up my yard and they were like, "Nah, dude, you don't have lead."
Mm.
Okay, so I mean, I guess I'm good after all, but I think because of that, a lot of people are confused, and it's elevated an issue that the council has some responsibility for. There is a board of water commissioners that sets rates and makes other decisions about affordability programs,
Eh,
but it's unavoidable for council. A lot of people were calling their council members asking questions not only about lead, but the drainage fee and all of these issues that they run.
because if people understand it's a water authority now, that's a regional water authority, uh, that brings Gary Brown to council many a times. Another thing that Gary Brown uplifted, that a lot of some of the affordability programs that have been instituted recently were instituted with ARPA funding, and a lot of the ARPA funding has been spent or will definitely be spent by 2025, as that was something that that the regional authority was seeking more funding for something sustainable during the close of the Biden administration, and that was not solidified. So some of the programs about what water affordability will look like, I believe, moving forward will be an issue that comes to light in 2025 and moving forward, as the concept of Detroit water and that being such an asset that has been fought over. It's no other term I can say, since so long, is going to be very key. Actually, when you read Coleman Young's book, Hardball, his autobiography, one of the first two things that leads with is the racism that's very prevalent in Detroit, and the water is one of the key reasons why. So that is from the scope of him being a politician, from the state house to being the executive of the city for years. And that's, going back to like the late 60s, 70s till today. So water is not going to be an issue that I believe leaves us. As we go to the next big discussion, that's always a Detroit discussion: neighborhood development versus downtown priorities. The tale of two Detroits. The tale of two Detroits. So, DDA tax capture debate, right? Calls for equitable investment in neighborhoods, libraries, and public services. And we can really just get a little bit more into this whole concept of what the DDA is. And I found out so much more about the DDA since doing this public comment show, and also just being more engaged in Detroit is different, because we hear a whole lot about, okay, our tax money is paying for this, our tax money is paying for that. How does it happen? I don't know if it's like explicitly broke down often. I'm gonna take a crack at it and look to provide a scope of this. So first off, the DDA, the Detroit Downtown Development Authority, is a tax increment financing program. So you're thinking like, what is that? I'm sounding like, I don't know, some type of person that's boring you to death already. So if you kind of can get the concept of what this is and the concept of what the tax capture is, we really got to go to the roots of why it exists. The Downtown Development Authority was created in 1967 during the Coleman Young administration, as there was a mass exodus from so many businesses that were downtown, because a lot of us believe, me included, just even looking in retrospect, just knowing the landscape of race in America, they saw Black leadership in position, and they said, I cannot have my business here in this city if Black leadership is going to lead this city. And this is always one of those key discussions about, as Black leadership assumes positions of leadership, resourcing what that looks like will definitely look different. We can call it the chicken or the egg, but either way, you don't have chickens or eggs in the kitchen. So creativity and different ideas of what this looks like always comes to light. The Downtown Development Authority is one of those things. Established in 76, as I said, it was designed to revitalize Detroit's downtown, and it was through strategic investments, tax increment financing. So the idea is that the city will pay for a lot of these investments and help bolster a lot of an economic base. Hence, like different concepts come to life. So from the DDA, we have Campus Marshes. Little Caesars Arena is a project of the DDA. The Hudson sites that will be unveiled very soon is that, I believe, the Renaissance Center then, and now it looks like possibly whatever happens with the Renaissance Center now will be a part of that. And the trickiness of this, quote unquote, or I don't even want to say trickiness, but the design of it. Let's say that. Let me be more unbiased and let me just be more, I guess, basic of it. So the design of this is a couple of things. It's a 13-member body that sits within, that's appointed by the executive office, so that's the mayor's office, but approved by the city council. So these 13 members make decisions on a lot of these developments that will be happening, right? Those developments that are happening are the key developments that bring concepts to say, okay, this is the type of city it can do an NFL draft. Hence, you all were partying at the draft this past year in 2024. A lot of those assets, what we look at, like the Campus Marshes and that whole footprint, are connected to the DDA. But the DDA is funded through taking a lot of money and capturing those taxes that were spent in millages for libraries, for schools, for what would be just regular taxation things of keeping city services going, and they're diverted into this downtown development authority. Also, inside of that downtown development authority, that's 7.2 miles of downtown, the money that's collected on taxes, a lot of that money only stays captured inside of downtown itself. So the investments can then begin to pay off themselves. But this is also supported through bond financing. The bond financing is what makes this so heavy, on top of the fact that it's diverting taxes that would have been spent on city assets. So right now, as of today, it's $537 million in debt already owed. That's $298 million in bonds that are for the bonds and $238 million in interest, right? So we look at like what that is kind of connecting to. All of this really impacts what can happen and what could loom for the possibility of more debt for the city. So even if moving forward you were to say, okay, let's devolve the DDA, debts to the DDA will still exist moving forward. This has been one of the key discussions between community and businesses throughout the city of Detroit, because a lot of business people say the barriers of entry for business. So that's just an easy way of saying between the licensing, the coding, the zoning, and getting the materials and finding the labor and just doing any project in Detroit is too arduous. It's too difficult to execute, because also some of this tax capture money went into one of, I believe, the greatest community projects we've seen, and that is the Detroit People's Food Commons, where the Detroit People's Food Co-op, the Mommy Imani Humphrey Hall, and the Coogee Chocolate Kitchen does exist. So the barriers of entry of how to do business here and where you can do business and how you can conduct business, almost many business people say it calls for, if I don't get some tax money, I can't do business in the city of Detroit. And this has been a discussion between community and business for so long. And this discussion is an elephant in the room, I would say, damn near every council. And the other key thing that adds that element in the room is this over scopes the concept of many Detroiters still are so angry about the overassessed taxes that exist, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But that's my, I guess, bookend discussion of what the DDA is. Malachi, what you got to add?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to this, and we talk about the DDA a lot on the show. But the bottom line for the city council is that they commissioned 3 reports that made a lot of recommendations about how the DDA could be not reformed, but different tweaks that could be made that would address some community concerns. The big thing is it seems very difficult to dissolve the DDA without resolving the debt issue, which Kari talked about. And we are making payments on that debt, into the foreseeable future. I think for the next decade at least. What could be done and was recommended by one of the researchers in an op-ed that we published on our bridgedetroit.com like last week is adding more public voices to these bodies. So DDA, the board is appointed by the mayor. There was a recommendation that maybe the city council get some of those appointments so that they can put community voices on there. Maybe there should be an adjustment to the way appointments to some of these boards are made, because these boards have a lot of decision making power when it comes to granting tax breaks, but also like shaping the DDA boundary, you know, creating programs. I mean, there was tax money that was used to upgrade like parking facilities for the NFL draft and do like different beautification projects and things like that. So they do make, some spending decisions on different things as well. Um, but yeah, I mean, Council President Mary Sheffield, who's running for mayor, has said that she is interested in maybe freezing, resetting where the tax capture is, so that basically from here on, new growth would be captured and redirected, but all of the growth that has happened, dating back to when the DDA was created, can be unlocked again and used by the city, because there has been a pretty substantial growth in the tax base downtown, and we have a lot of larger projects that are coming in the next couple of years that will probably continue to boost that
which
value.
which I want to point that out again. Like I say, a lot of the taxes are captured even in those projects that have been invested into the DDA, where that money can only be reinvested back into that. So if you kind of let's give an analogy here, okay? If you have a project that we're working on, let's say myself, Malachi, and Bryce Huffman of Bridge Detroit all are working on a project, and we're going to get it off the ground. And we say, all right, Bryce, you're working on something new. Let's go on and let's invest in Bryce's new project. I don't know, let's say $1,000. And that project is a lemonade stand, right? And myself and Malachi already have 2 other lemonade stands, right? And we continue to invest in the Bryce lemonade stand. But the Bryce lemonade stand doesn't have to pay any money back to us yet. It just has to reinvest in the Bryce lemonade stand. You know what I'm saying? So this has new investment, but that new investment isn't coming back to the city. The argument being made, as you talked about the report, and it was a report that was commissioned and Mary Sheffield asked for, and I believe that was through, let me pull this up.
It was the Citizens Research Council of Michigan.
Yep.
Which is
Okay.
a nonpartisan think tank, basically, that does various research on policy issues. But the council often asks them to do more intensive studies that, the legislative policy division in the city may not be equipped to do.
So the citizens research report comes out, and it definitely speaks to a lot of this not necessarily being the most effective economic engine for growth. That is a lot of the argument there. Appointees of the executive administration of Mayor Duggan say that through this, the tax base of City of Detroiters across the board has gone up, and this is added to the benefits and quality of life of Detroiters. So the debate from a business person's lens and a developer's lens is, this really has us looking at Detroit to conduct business. Kind of going back to the argument from the beginning when this was started by Mayor Coleman Young and carried on through Duggan. The challenge that I would give to this is so much more of these projects become exponentially more in cost and heavy throughout the Duggan administration, that the debt connected to what this is really kicking the can for so long. So if you open up the cap and now you can invest in those neighborhoods, we're not looking for so much of some of this current design of the city of Detroit, where a lot of philanthropic partnerships are looking to invest and pour into communities, where so much of the city's money is investing into downtown and incentivizing businesses to come to Detroit in that downtown district. Hence, if all tax money throughout Detroit could be spent throughout Detroit, then we're not necessarily asking foundations to provide a lot of the services that a city would provide in many other cities.
And I think a lot of that debt, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a significant amount of that debt is from LCA too. So we're paying off those bonds to build the, one particular project.
And that's what made that project such a heavy discussion in community. That heavy discussion, obviously, Little Caesars Arena. And I believe that Hudson site will be something like that. And a lot of the discussion about what will happen with the Renaissance Center, I would be shocked and surprised if that's not going to be as heavy of a discussion move forward about what would be needed. And that LCA project continues to expand, hence its District Detroit. It expands in footprint. Also, what's happened with the Henry Ford Hospital project and what's happened in that footprint in space with the Detroit Pistons training facility and that partnership with Michigan State University. So the new projects, taking the phrase from my good friend Dr. Yusuf Bunchy Shakur, is we love development throughout a community. We just don't want development imposed upon us and extracting the resources that would have been there for the community itself. So this is definitely me putting back on my community organizing hat, not necessarily the developer hat. But this is a hell of a discussion that happened in 2024. And I only think that this discussion will expand in 2025, especially when we think about a local election happening.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. It's a conversation at city council. We haven't seen any actual movement on any of the changes that we talked about, but I think it's going to be an election issue.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So another thing, the reparations task force and the video essay I did connected to the reparations task force. You provided this year something that was last year, I should say, closing out 2024. You did a 3-part article that was so rich and so in depth, Malachi. I would urge, like, seriously, if you have any questions about the reparations task force, I would strongly urge of people to read this article, as it's so in depth, it's so rich of the full scope of the task force, Detroiters and community in reference to reparations, where it stands, the history of it, and then what's moving forward in the scope of a lot of this. As this was a national story as it came to light in the beginning. And right now, it sits with a lot of people still asking a lot of questions of what's happening, how it's happening. I do believe right now the functionality of the task force and the work of the task force is not as I don't know what term I want to use, exciting as some of those meetings were in the beginning, but it still has a lot of Detroiters asking a lot of questions. And the key scope that I would always like to uplift, that I've said from the beginning, is this is really a discussion more of municipal harms from the city to residents, because reparations is such a charged concept for many people, especially in the city with so many 80% Black people like Detroit. We're thinking reparations from enslavement of America, not necessarily the municipal harms of what this municipality charged to people. And even with those municipal harms, the other elephant in the room is a lot of those municipal harms, when we think about urban renewal and like basically putting freeways in every Black community, at those times, a lot of those Black communities were not homes, businesses, and properties that were owned by Black people, because it was illegal for Black people to own property at that time. So this becomes a very nuanced discussion of how to right set and empower people that were harmed there. And the other thing is, like, we don't want to pay taxes to pay ourselves back as well. And the study and the research is exploring right now a lot of the harms and exploring ways that would be equitable of what the repair would look like. And you've done a lot of deep dives on this. What do you got to say from 2024 reparations?
It was a year where the task force, kind of rebuilt itself and kind of built a foundation to do work going forward. They commissioned some reports. They had some productive conversations, I think, but it also is a year that ended without, still much progress. Excuse me.
Oh, yep. Hey,
Wow, that was a live moment.
I know.
Maybe we can figure out how to cut that or something. But sorry, folks.
Hey, it happens. It happens. We are here. It happens. But anyway, we'll figure that out. Yeah.
Anyway, it's a year that ended with the chair of the task force kind of going rogue and releasing his own report and going to the city council and presenting it to them, kind of going around the actual task force itself, which is still working on putting together official recommendations. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's Is it dysfunctional still? I don't know. Is it working toward some recommendations that will come to the council? Yes. What are those recommendations? I don't know. They haven't really still been able to say like this is specifically what we're trying to do. They're talking about a lot of different things, and this is a very complicated conversation to have, especially when you're talking about what harms are we trying to fix. A lot of there's still some confusion and debate over whether this should be focused on things that the city did in the municipal harms or slavery, which has been the way that reparations conversations have been framed for a long time.
Mhm.
Thanks to the work of
Reparations Ray
reparations Ray
Jenkins
Jenkins and
and
all the
so
folks that you
many
looked at
people.
in your
And
documentary.
and you also uplift that as it's written into the charter, it's written from the lens of acknowledging enslavement as well. So it's just as confusing, you could say, or it's more to be understood. Let's not say confusing. More to be understood. Let's look at it in a more glass half full perspective. And even with that report, I mean, you know, Keith Williams, one of the chairs of this, Lord knows, Keith is, if it ever was a very polarizing political figure, it is Keith Williams. And of that, I don't even know the arc. As he called me when he was doing that. I'm like, in what universe is this going to be approved? As this is not following the procedures and protocols from what was put on the ballot initiative that you were a part of in the first place. Like to bring in your own report is, like I say, Detroit is different. That's
Yeah,
all I got to say.
I think it kind of task force members feel like it kind of undermines the progress that they did make to end the year like that. So I don't know. We're gonna see. They asked for an adjustment on their deadline to present recommendations to the city council. So I believe they have until March, end of March now. That's gonna come up fast. It's also an election year, so we're gonna see how members of the council that are running for re-election or running for mayor are gonna treat these recommendations. Council President Sheffield, has talked about this being a long-term effort. This doesn't end with a set of recommendations. She's talked about maybe creating some kind of office of reparations to implement policies moving forward. There's a lot to figure out still in terms of how this gets funded, who qualifies. I mean, we're still like very early in this process when it comes to like, okay, so what are we actually doing? I think there's been a lot of discussion to identify what happened and what the harms were, and I think there's consensus around that. But
And
what
that
do we do
that
about it? I think it's still figured out.
that right there is very tough too, because even in my presentations of a debt owed, not a handout, community is very upset to even think to themselves, why do we have to do a research report anyway? It's like triggering to a lot of Black audiences to say, why are we researching this? We know what was wrong. That is something that I've heard multiple times. And that's from me presenting things about HR 40. And I'm like, okay, at the time, you got to think about then. And I can't tell you how triggering I've received. Every time I've given a presentation, I at least get like about 5 people in the room to say, why we got to study it. We know what was wrong. We know what was done. It needs to be repaired. So that becomes contentious in one way. And similar to what John Conyers presented about HR 40, this is the mythology of how to function within the system of politics. So I'm not necessarily saying I don't understand the sediments, and at times I feel the same way. Why are we studying something that we know was wrong in the first place? But I do understand in the scope of when in Rome, dress as the Romans do. So hence, if we're gonna look at the municipal government, a state government, or a national government to move forward with reparations, it's going to have to come from the lens of how a lot of this moves forward. And then that's when you get other arguments from people like, hey, but what about the Asian hate crime bill? And what about this? And what about that? And what about what happened to a lot of the Japanese people that were in internment camps? So there are debates and precedent that is presented, and it becomes even tougher because just the relationship between Black America and Black Americans and America itself has not been a good relationship historically. Hence, hearing the term like "make America great again," it's like, not for us. So that argument can become more of a tough discussion as time moves. But yeah, more reparations definitely moving in 2025. Oh man. So public comment sessions. Let's see. What are we looking at? All right. We have other concepts moving forward, looking ahead to 2025. Lot looking ahead. So, one of the key things is the mayoral race looking ahead. We're going to have a new mayor elected in the city of Detroit. This mayor will be not Mike Duggan for the first time in 12 years. So, that is going to frame a lot of what moves forward. And this mayoral race is a lot of just discussions in the community world, in the business world, and definitely from the lens of the media world so far. I believe that it will become more of a common discussion throughout, day-to-day Detroiters very soon. And Malachi has been on the beat already, covering with a heck of a story already about some of the backgrounds from some of the candidates entered. Some of that already changes as Joe Tate was exploring what that would look like. But the closing session of the Michigan legislator, I believe, definitely does not put Joe Tate in the best light right now. But politics, as we see who our president-elect is, it we never know with this political stuff because Detroit is different. What's the scope right now when it comes to the mayoral race? You did a sit down with Fred Durrell that's looking to make an announcement soon. His hat's in the ring. You've had some questions with Santil Jenkins. Her hat looks to be in the ring, definitely.
She's making an announcement next week. Durhall is supposed to make an announcement sometime later this month. Sheffield came out.
Announcement.
So there's some folks that have formed committees that, well, I mean, Tate really is the one that has formed a committee that hasn't, officially come out yet. And you brought up lame duck. We were talking with Durhall a little bit about this yesterday. Wondering, how much does that affect the way the lame duck session ended, basically with Tate unable to get the Democratic caucus under his control, unable to get folks to show up for votes. Key protest from Detroit Rep Karen Whitsett not coming to the final days of session basically tanked a lot of bills, including Public Safety Trust Fund, which would have provided more money for the Community Violence Intervention Program, which has now been attributed as being a factor in Detroit's crime reduction.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a pretty interesting turn of the screw there. Will Tate be punished for some of that? I don't know. I mean, I don't really think a lot of people know about this. They don't, lame duck session. A lot of what happens in the legislature already is like very insidery, and the general public has no clue.
Yeah,
there's great reporting out there. I mean, like, but how many people are subscribed to the Detroit News and are following like beat for beat on this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I think it could hurt Tate with his relationships, with other lawmakers and other public officials and people who are, affected by, community organizations or, different leaders of groups in the city that might have been affected by some of these bills dying. But I don't know, in terms of like, will the public punish him for that? I think this gets lost.
I would say back to it's about how the narrative is spun. And then you uplifted something else I want to speak to, and that is the shot stopper program. The shot stopper program, a lot of success. There's a sit down that I still got to get all the way through with Alea Harvey Quinn and Bryce Huffman on Bridge Detroit, as Force Detroit really, I believe, like created something that was very innovative about executing responses to homicides, violent crimes, gun violence throughout communities, and using a lot of social media and being responsive to what can happen inside communities. And it's had one heck of an impact on a lot of intervention and prevention and not necessarily response. So it's removed the need to, I guess, police and arrest a lot of it and more intervene for more sanctimonious, peaceful outcomes. And it's something that I definitely got to applaud. Is in the beginning, I didn't know what that would look like, if that would look through the lens of vigilante justice, but it's more so been in community organizing. And I believe that that's been a heck of a victory in what those interventions have looked like in the city of Detroit. But back to, that takes funding. Some of that funding was ARPA funding, some of that could have been state funding. And right now, we don't know what that will look like moving forward, but definitely hopeful that something like that can continue to move on.
Yeah, I mean, there's bipartisan support. Matt Hall has said that, the new speaker, replacement for Joe Tate, Matt Hall, who's a Republican from like Calhoun County, Southwest Michigan, kind of where I grew up. He said that he's supportive of this, but the problem is, you had a bill that was ready to be voted on, and now you're kind of going back to the start of the process. It's got to go through the House and the Senate again. It might be tweaked. I don't know. I mean, the conversation. The conversation is different under a Republican majority versus a Democratic majority. How different? We'll see. But that's the concern that Durhal expressed yesterday. Is that okay? We can trust Matt Hall maybe to bring this across, but is it going to be the same bill? No. So I don't know. And it's just interesting because the city's come a long way. Public officials, the mayor in particular, has come a long way in recognizing community violence intervention as an effective strategy. A lot of folks were doing this work for free. They were doing it to prove it for a long time, and they finally got to a point where they've proven it, and now the money has fallen out. This was a program funded with federal pandemic aid that had an expiration date on it, and going to the state was really the only option to keep it going. So there will be pressure on Lansing to push this bill, but yeah, I mean, it's a Republican majority. Democrats from Detroit have less influence and power than they did before. So we'll see what that means.
Definitely. Other things that always exist when we think about your journey of even us being here and kind of knowing each other would tell us Detroit property overtax assessment.
Comes up every city council meeting. There were people down there yesterday yelling about it, as they should. I mean, people got overtaxed. A lot of people lost their houses, and there's been really not a lot done to.
So what I laugh is like more so a laugh because of the pain associated with this. The overassessed taxes, people lost their homes. People have faced so much more economic stress. And this is the other thing that makes the DDA so tough, because on one hand, it's tax money going to businesses to conduct quote unquote booster economic sustainability, and Detroiters are being overassessed in taxes unfairly. And corporate counsel will explicitly say, Conrad Mallon, meaning the attorney of the city of Detroit, it's like it's not within the charter to pay people back. And this is the I guess the savvy of an attorney. As much as he'll say it's not within the charter to pay people back, he doesn't acknowledge the fact that, like, is it in the charter to take people's money? And people lost homes for that. Neighborhoods look completely different. Not to mention the work of Bernadette and so many others is already, other reports are saying that people are still being overassessed in taxes. And if you kind of can get a scope of this, Detroiters do pay more in taxes for property tax than most municipalities in Michigan, and definitely municipalities across the nation. So you're paying more in property tax. You already know that. But even beyond the more you're paying, it's also stepping up and saying that you are owing more. So council has done some work about like how to look at and assess what's happening with taxes in the assessor's office. From people I know, like my family, getting a response can not necessarily be as effective. At least for my family's journey and me looking to help and get that response, it hasn't been effective. I've definitely seen some of the people from the assessor's office in different community meetings, but then when the journey to the Coleman A. Young Municipal Center comes to life, some of that is not in that same scope. It's kind of like, hey, fill out this form and send us an email, but the responsiveness has not led to some of those actions. Now, as much as I'm saying that, I also have seen others receive something differently. They have gotten responsiveness, and the difficulty I believe in a lot of the overassessed taxes is that how ownership looks in a lot of these properties. Like myself, legacy family homes that have been passed on, and where the deed is, and cleaning up the deed, and what the ownership of a property looks like. And if another person assumes the ownership of that, Obviously, it's people in homes where, you may buy a home from somebody and it's been in a family since the 70s or the 80s, which is very commonplace in the city of Detroit. You look on Zillow, the taxes were $1,200 annually. And you think to yourself, I can do that. I'm there. You buy it, 2025, it gets assessed again. And now you're looking at a $6,000 tax bill. And you're like, what the hell? Changes your mortgage, changes probably your probably your blood pressure, changes everything going on with what's happening in ownership of this property. This is commonplace in the city of Detroit, and having systems that address this, and I believe most of this in design is being looked at. That's going to be very key. So definitely property tax over assessment. We talked about community benefits ordinances. This has kind of been, I believe, the community response to a lot of the development that's happened into the city of Detroit. So if you kind of can get an understanding of this, the community benefit ordinance will have a community benefit agreement with a lot of these projects coming into community. A couple years ago, championed by Tanya Myers Phillips, that just won a seat into the Michigan State House. So shout out to Tanya, and Council President Sheffield and others joined on to this to move forward the concept of having always an ordinance where an agreement is needed. That ordinance, a lot of activists say, needs to be strengthened, and I believe it will be strengthened so that every project that's coming into a community has agreements within that community. It has a board of people moving forward with those agreements, and those people are as empowered as the people doing the business to make sure that it's an equitable relationship between that business and the community if they're conducting business with Detroit tax money. So this has always been one of my key arguments. If you want to do business how you want to do it, you should bring your own money and do business that way. But if you want to take Detroit tax dollars, it definitely has to have Detroiters on the voice of what's happening in the city of Detroit. You want to add anything about community benefits agreements or ordinances?
No, just I mean, we've talked about the frustrations with it. It's flawed for a number of reasons. According to folks that want to see some reforms, there have been council members that have supported re-examining this ordinance, but nothing has been formally introduced. So I would put this in another bucket of things that
will happen.
We'll see.
It'll be a discussion. It'll be a discussion.
It's an ongoing discussion that, yeah. I mean, will we see something this year? Nobody has so far said like, this is what I'm doing in 2025. We're going to reform the ordinance. But every time there's a large development that goes through this process, a lot of the cracks are exposed. So, including with, in this week, the Civil Rights Department released its twice a year, they put out a report showing how developers have met the obligations that they've agreed to under these agreements. And, the CBO process, the developers have to negotiate an agreement with residents who live around their project for extra investments in that community that the developers will make in exchange for the tax break. So we get the tax break, we'll give you these things that, are negotiated. There's not really like a template for what that looks like. And they found that, most of them are pretty much on track. District Detroit is behind, but only because a lot of their commitments are tied to construction. And hey, construction is behind. Will we see District Detroit break ground this year? That is a question because they are a year behind already on their decade lagging plan. But anyway, Herman Kiefer project was found to be behind on some of its commitments to create new housing in the area around that hospital complex, land that they bought from the land bank. So, that's another issue is like, even once they make it through, following up with the commitments doesn't always happen. And what is the city's tools to do that? So anyway, we could talk about CBO like all day, but basically nothing's been introduced yet. So we'll see, but people know what the problems are. It's been pretty well discussed at this point, I think.
Yeah. And I'm going to definitely tell you this. Here at Public Comment, we plan on introducing you to and interviewing as many of these candidates across the board as possible. So if you're watching Public Comment, and I'd imagine some candidates are watching Public Comment right now, if you're running for police commission, if you're running for clerk, if you're running for city council, if you're running for mayor, we love to have you on public comment. And I want to ask people some of the same questions across the board. And you should be ready for the community benefits ordinance question of what you think is happening with it. How do you think these agreements function, and what you will do about interacting with ensuring that this is something I'm leading the question here as a community person, sacrosanct and something that is honored. And what should it look like? If you have a difference of opinion, please share with us, and I would love that. But so many of these other things in scope. We're going to be talking community benefits ordinance. We're going to be talking downtown development authority. We're going to be talking about the water infrastructure and affordability. We're going to be talking about house affordability. We're definitely going to be talking about overassessed taxes, because that's going to be an elephant that you're not going to shake or get out of. And we're going to also talk about what your vision moving forward for the city is, and what do you think about not just what happened with the shot stopper program, but other ways of intervening in what public safety looks like moving forward. These are the discussions you should be ready for when you come to public comment, because this is what the public is commenting about, amongst other things. It's always the discussion about voting in elections and things balanced there. And this is a clerk race. So this would be the time, if you think that the voting and the elections could be tightened up and have questions about it. Hey, guess what? We have a democracy where you can engage in it and you can see the vision as executed as you think best. But that's here at Public Comment. Kari Frazier, Malachi, what do you got to say on this year end?
BridgeDetroit.com is where you can find all of our reporting for this year. We are diving deep into city council races and the mayoral election. We can probably talk about this. Me and Stephen Henderson, who obviously, are going to be working on a multimedia project focused on elections this year. So we will be bringing you a lot more analysis and exclusive reporting on that. In particular, we are going to keep doing public comment here to talk about city council. You can always find my reporting for free on bridgedetroit.com. I do the weekly council notebook newsletter, which goes out into your email at 5:45 in the morning each Wednesday.
Oh, man.
And sometimes I post more than once a week, but I'm writing other stories too. But that notebook is really what fuels this conversation at public comment every week. So definitely go find that, subscribe for free, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your dog.
Definitely. And a lot of information from that citizens research report. You can find, you did a great article on that when it came out in September of 2024. So if you're looking for some more in-depth analysis of the Downtown Development Authority, I say check the archives of Bridge Detroit around September, because it's like the end of September when that report was released, and Malachi gives a great overview from that, and also different perspective. It's some business perspective and some executive body perspective from Mayor Duggan's team as well. So it's not just from this lens, but I kind of lean on community all the time, because that's, kind of Detroit is Different is about that in community. That project he spoke of with Stephen Henderson in the background, I'm going to be playing a lot of roles. Also, Bryce Huffman. This is going to be fun because it's a lot to know. As Detroit votes, we're going to be covering it. Definitely. Thank you so much for the commitment and watching In Public Comment 2024. Only more will come in 2025. Peace. You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. the live stream. Detroit is Different in Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit.